Ancient sailors crossed immense oceans long before our recorded history began. This video uncovers evidence of knowledge exchange between early continents, a mystery that challenges the foundation of our historical understanding. By the end, you will see the ancient world not as isolated islands of culture, but as a network of curious and connected minds. We will examine colossal stone heads with puzzling features and investigate how a common sweet potato could grow on opposite sides of the Pacific. These clues suggest a forgotten chapter where ideas and people moved across the globe. What does it mean for our identity if the human story is one of constant, daring connection? A single reed boat, silhouetted against a sky dense with unfamiliar stars, holds a profound question. This quiet image represents the very heart of our mystery, the daring possibility that defines our entire investigation. We call it transoceanic contact, the theory that ancient peoples undertook deliberate, successful voyages between continents long before the age of Columbus. To understand the evidence, we must first understand this foundational idea and the great debate that surrounds it. At its core, this is a clash between two ways of seeing human history. On one side is the concept of independent invention, the long-held view that great civilizations, separated by vast oceans, developed their pyramids, their writing, their calendars independently, a testament to the universal ingenuity of the human mind. It is a comforting narrative of parallel genius. On the other side stands diffusionism, the idea that cultural traits, technologies, and ideas can travel, carried by people across land and sea. This does not diminish achievement, but reframes it as part of a conversation, a shared story of borrowed, adapted, and improved knowledge. For much of modern scholarship, the idea of pre-Columbian ocean crossings was dismissed, often labeled as fringe or fantastical. The oceans were seen as insurmountable barriers, and the notion of contact felt like an affront to the isolated brilliance of ancient American cultures. Yet this dismissal itself may have been a limitation of perspective. The historian John B. S. Haldane once remarked that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. This wisdom applies perfectly to history. Our assumptions about what was possible can blind us to what actually was. So, let us lay out the conceptual map. Proponents of contact point to several potential routes across the vast Pacific, from the sophisticated maritime cultures of Asia and Polynesia toward the shores of South America, or across the Atlantic, driven by currents from Africa or even southern Europe. These are not imagined paths for the sake of a story. They are routes dictated by wind and water, routes that we know later historical voyages utilized. The question is not if the ocean could be crossed, but when the first courageous navigators decided to try. What if our traditional narratives have inadvertently built walls where there were only waves? Embracing the possibility of early contact does not rewrite history to make it smaller, but to make it infinitely more connected, more daring, and more human. It shifts the question from how these cultures could achieve so much alone to how they might have shared, learned, and inspired one another across the globe. With this framework in mind, the scattered pieces of evidence we find begin to look less like coincidence and more like fragments of a forgotten conversation. Deep in the humid jungles of southern Mexico, stone giants sleep. They are the Olmec colossal heads, 17 monumental sculptures carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, each one a silent sovereign weighing up to 24 tons. Their creation dates to around 900 years before the Common Era, a time when most of Europe was in its prehistoric age. To stand before one is to feel the weight of a profound mystery carved in rock. These are not crude idols but individualized portraits, each with distinct facial features, headgear, and expressions of calm, imposing authority. The technology behind them is itself a marvel. The basalt was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, then transported over 50 miles through swamps and rivers to ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo, a feat of engineering and coordinated labor that speaks of a highly organized society. When archaeologist Matthew Stirling first uncovered these heads in the 1930s and 40s, he was struck not just by their scale, but by the questions they whispered. Who were these people, and why did the Olmec choose to immortalize them in such a permanent, staggering form? The most persistent question, however, lies in the faces themselves. To many observers, the features of certain heads, broad noses, full lips, and the closed, fleshy eyelids do not align with the typical artistic representations of later indigenous Mesoamerican cultures. This has led some researchers over decades to propose a provocative interpretation. Could these be portraits of individuals from across the Atlantic, perhaps from parts of Africa? The idea is not that Africans built Olmec society, but that perhaps Olmec sculptors encountered and memorialized visitors from afar, people whose distinct physical traits were recorded with a stonecutter's precision. Proponents of this view see it as artistic evidence, a literal stone record of a face-to-face meeting between worlds. Mainstream archaeology, however, offers powerful counterarguments rooted in local context. Scholars point out that the so-called African features are not universal among the heads. Some display very different visages. They argue that these sculptures are firmly within an emerging Mesoamerican artistic tradition, possibly representing local rulers or deified ancestors. The features could be stylistic conventions, exaggerations of power, or symbolic representations tied to Olmec cosmology, like the word jaguar motif associated with rain and fertility. The headgear, often resembling protective helmets, might signify a ball player or a warrior, roles central to Olmec society. Furthermore, there is no accompanying archaeological evidence, like African artifacts or remains, found at Olmec sites to substantiate direct contact. The heads, in this view, are a magnificent homegrown achievement, a testament to the Olmec's own genius and their desire to project power onto the landscape. So where does this leave us with the San Lorenzo head, gazing out from the museum with its enigmatic smile? It leaves us at the heart of the interpretative dilemma. Is this a face from another continent or a face of this continent, seen through a cultural lens we have yet to fully understand? The heads refuse to give a simple answer. They stand as a monumental reminder that art is not just decoration, it is a language, and sometimes the most fascinating mysteries are not about what was said, but about who might have been listening and what stories they chose to carve in stone for eternity. This artistic puzzle, heavy with implication, shows us that the evidence for ancient contact is rarely a smoking gun. It is more often a suggestive whisper, a strange alignment of style that challenges our expectations and invites us to look closer. And as we turn from stone to something far more fragile, we find another whisper, this one carried not on the wind but on the roots of a humble plant. There is a quiet hillside in eastern Tennessee that holds a secret, one carved not in monumental stone, but on a small, unassuming piece of slate. In 1889, a team led by Smithsonian archaeologist Cyrus Thomas excavated a burial mound near Bat Creek. Among the items recovered was a flat stone about the length of a hand, resting beside the remains of several individuals. On its surface were a series of deeply incised, angular characters. To Thomas, they appeared to be Cherokee syllabary, and he catalogued it as such, a curious local find. For decades, the stone sat in a museum drawer, its strange markings largely forgotten. Then, in the 1960s, it was pulled back into the light by the scholar Cyrus Gordon. a specialist in ancient Mediterranean languages, Gordon made a startling claim. The characters were not Cherokee. He argued they were Paleo-Hebrew, a script used in the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. His translation of the inscription was even more direct, reading it as a phrase meaning for Judah. If authentic, this interpretation would be revolutionary. It would suggest that someone literate in a Semitic script was present in the Appalachian region over 1,000 years before European contact, a concept that fundamentally challenges the narrative of an isolated New World. The academic reaction was swift and deeply skeptical. The idea of ancient Hebrews in pre-Columbian Tennessee clashed violently with established models of history. Critics pointed to the circumstances of the stone's discovery in a mound that had been disturbed by farming, raising the possibility of a later intrusion. They argued the inscription could be a modern forgery, perhaps created by a local person familiar with unusual alphabets, meant to deceive the 19th century archaeologists who were eagerly surveying such sites. The Bat Creek stone became a classic case of an out-of-place artifact, an object that seems to belong to a different time and place, and therefore is often dismissed as too problematic to be real. Yet the story did not end there. In the late 20th century, new examinations were conducted. Researchers performed a detailed paleographic analysis, comparing each character to known examples of Paleo-Hebrew and related scripts from the ancient Levant. They noted the specific forms of the letters, the direction of the writing, and the style of the engraving. Furthermore, material associated with the burial, including wood fragments found near the stone, was subjected to radiocarbon dating. The results pointed to a date between the 1st and 8th centuries of the Common Era. This scientific data did not prove the inscription was ancient, but it did confirm that the archaeological context itself was genuinely old, complicating the simple hoax narrative. A forger in the 1880s would have needed to not only possess obscure knowledge of Paleo-Hebrew, but also to have secretly placed the stone in an ancient, sealed burial context without detection, a feat of archaeological deception that seems remarkably sophisticated. So we are left with two competing narratives, each with its own gravity. One sees a clever 19th century fake, a product of the era's fascination with mound builders and lost tribes. The other sees a genuine, fragile relic of an unimaginable journey, a single line of text that whispers of a faraway homeland. The stone's power lies in this very ambiguity. It forces us to confront a difficult question: how do we evaluate evidence that contradicts a deeply held paradigm? Is our instinct to protect the existing story, or to follow the artifact wherever it may lead, no matter how uncomfortable the destination? The Bat Creek stone does not provide a final answer, but it brilliantly illustrates the tension at the core of our search, a tension between what we think we know about the past and what the past itself quietly insists on showing us. This mystery of written language leads us to an even broader canvas, where the evidence is not carved in stone, but woven into the very fabric of culture, waiting to be read in the shared stories of gods and heroes across the world. High on the Altiplano, the thin air of the Andes holds more than just the breath of ancient empires. Near the shores of Lake Titicaca, a farmer's plow once struck not earth but ceramic, unearthing what may be the single most controversial artifact in the entire pre-Columbian contact debate. They call it the Fuente Magna bowl, a large, beautifully crafted stone vessel that should, by every conventional account, be an impossible object. Its smooth interior and exterior are not decorated with familiar Andean motifs, but are densely inscribed with two distinct types of script. To the astonishment of those who first studied it, the symbols bore a startling resemblance to ancient writing from the other side of the world, specifically Sumerian cuneiform and even older Proto-Sumerian hieroglyphics. This was not a vague stylistic echo. It was a precise linguistic anomaly sitting at an altitude of over 12,000 feet in Bolivia. If authentic, The bowl does not just suggest contact, it screams of a connection so deep and specific it threatens to rewrite the early chapters of human civilization. For this reason, some researchers have dubbed it the Rosetta Stone of the Americas, a potential key to decoding a lost narrative of global interaction. The primary advocate for its study has been Dr. Clyde Winters, a linguist and anthropologist who has spent decades analyzing the inscriptions. His work involves meticulous comparison, aligning the bowl's characters with sign lists from ancient Mesopotamia. He identifies specific symbols like the sign for a deity or a ruler, and even proposes a translation for a section of the text, suggesting it is a dedication to a mother goddess, possibly Nia, used in a purification ritual. The implications are staggering. It points to the presence of individuals, perhaps priests or scribes, who carried their written language and religious practices across oceans and continents, embedding them into the heart of South America millennia ago. The bowl itself, with its rounded form and apparent function, suggests a ceremonial purpose, perhaps for libations or offerings, making it not just a written record, but a sacred object of active worship. Yet, as with all such discoveries, the Fuente Magna bowl is shrouded in profound difficulties. Its provenance is obscure. It was not excavated by professional archaeologists in a controlled dig, which immediately casts a shadow of doubt. The exact location and stratigraphic layer are lost to us, making geological or contextual dating a near impossibility. Orthodox archaeology largely dismisses the bowl as a probable forgery or a case of modern contamination, an object perhaps brought from elsewhere and accidentally introduced into the local soil. The lack of any other corroborating Sumerian artifacts in the region is a powerful counterargument. Why is there only one bowl? Where are the tools, the settlements, the other fragments of this supposed foreign presence? The bowl currently resides in a small municipal museum in La Paz, more a curiosity than a celebrated treasure, its status reflecting the academic limbo it inhabits. This case study perfectly illustrates the immense challenge of studying out-of-place artifacts. When an object contradicts the established timeline so violently, the burden of proof becomes astronomically high, and the instinct to protect the prevailing narrative is strong. So we must ask, what ritual did this bowl serve? Who were the hands that carved this foreign script into Andean stone? The Fuente Magna bowl pushes our speculation to its furthest edge, asking us to consider connections not just centuries, but potentially millennia older than any we have previously discussed. It moves the conversation from the possible exchange of goods and ideas to the profound transfer of written language and ritual, the very bedrock of cultural identity. And as we grapple with the silence surrounding this enigmatic vessel, our search for evidence must turn from the crafted objects of culture to the living, breathing evidence of the natural world, to clues that were not inscribed by human hands but planted by them, growing quietly across continents. A simple root vegetable holds one of the most compelling clues in our entire investigation. The sweet potato, a staple food across the Pacific Islands for centuries, presents a botanical mystery that science alone cannot solve. When Captain James Cook arrived in Polynesia in the late 18th century, his crew was astonished to find fields of a familiar tuber already under widespread cultivation. This was decades before any known European introduction. The sweet potato, Ipomoea batatas, is indisputably native to South America. Its wild ancestors grow there, and its earliest archaeological remains are found in Peruvian caves dating back over 8,000 years. So how did this South American crop become a cornerstone of Polynesian agriculture? The answer points directly to human hands crossing the ocean. Botanists like Douglas Yen became detectives of this dispersal. They ruled out the simple idea of seeds or vines floating across the Pacific naturally. The sweet potato does not propagate by drifting tubers, they rot in salt water. Its seeds are tiny and unlikely to survive a transoceanic journey and then establish themselves as a cultivated crop. The spread required deliberate human action, either transporting the living vines or tubers and then carefully tending them. This alone suggests a voyage, or more likely, a series of voyages. The evidence deepens with genetics and language. Modern DNA analysis confirms that the sweet potatoes grown across Polynesia, from Hawaii to New Zealand, share a direct lineage with varieties from northwestern South America. They are not independent domestications, they are family. Even more telling is the linguistic trail. In the Quechua language of the Andes, the word for sweet potato is kumara. Across the Pacific, in parts of Polynesia like the Marquesas Islands and New Zealand, the words kumala and kumara are used. This is not a coincidence that ocean currents could create. Words travel with people. This shared name strongly implies that when Polynesian voyagers encountered this new plant, they also learned its name from the people who gave it to them, adopting and adapting the term into their own languages. The journey poses a fascinating chronological puzzle. Did Polynesian sailors, the greatest navigators of the ancient world, reach South America and return with this prized crop? Or did South American mariners, perhaps using the same balsa reed rafts we discussed earlier, carry it westward into the Pacific? The currents and winds facilitate travel both ways, making either scenario plausible. Recent discoveries add another layer to this two-way exchange. Archaeologists in Chile uncovered chicken bones dating to before European contact, with DNA linking them to Polynesian fowl. Meanwhile, evidence of the South American bottle gourd appears in early Polynesian sites. This paints a picture not of a single accidental landing, but of sustained interaction, a maritime network where goods, food, and knowledge were exchanged. The sweet potatoes saga is more than a story of agricultural exchange. It is a testament to connection. It tells us that the ocean was not just a barrier, but a highway for the curious and the courageous. This humble tuber, rooted in the soil of two distant worlds, became a living bridge. It fed communities, shaped cultures, and now offers us silent, stubborn proof that the ancient map was far more connected than we once drew it. If food could travel such distances, what else was being shared in the holds of those ancient voyagers' boats? This question naturally draws our attention from the organic to the architectural, from what sustained life to what celebrated it, leading us to perhaps the most visually striking parallel of all. The leaves of the coca plant have been a sacred companion to Andean peoples for thousands of years. Chewed or brewed into a tea, they alleviate the harsh effects of high altitude, suppress hunger, and provide a gentle, sustained energy, a vital tool for survival and spirituality in a demanding world. Far across the globe, in the arid steppes and mountains of Asia, another plant held a similar revered place. Ephedra, a scraggly, leafless shrub, was a cornerstone of traditional Chinese medicine for over 5,000 years, prized for treating asthma, nasal congestion, and fatigue. Its dried stems were known as ma huang, a powerful stimulant and decongestant. Here we have two botanically unrelated plants, separated by the largest ocean on Earth, each independently discovered and integrated into the deepest fabric of their respective cultures as stimulant medicines. This is not a story of a shared crop like the sweet potato, but something more abstract, a parallel discovery of biochemical utility. The active compounds are what make this parallel so intriguing. The coca leaf contains cocaine alkaloids, while ephedra contains ephedrine and pseudoephedrine. To the human body, these different chemicals produce remarkably similar effects. They stimulate the central nervous system, increase heart rate and alertness, and open the airways. For the pioneering ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultz, who spent a lifetime documenting indigenous plant knowledge in the Americas, such parallels raised profound questions. When cultures separated by immense distances find identical solutions in the natural pharmacy around them, Are we seeing independent human genius or fragments of a shared ancient wisdom? The archaeological record shows just how deep this tradition runs. In South America, mummified remains from coastal Peru, dating back over 3,000 years, have been found with coca leaves still present in the cheek pouches, a direct link to ancient ritual and daily practice. In China, ephedra residues have been identified on pottery shards and referenced in the oldest known medical texts. The geographical separation is absolute, with the entire Pacific Ocean between the native ranges of these plants. So how do we explain this? One possibility is the stunning power of convergent evolution, not of the plants but of human observation. It suggests that our ancestors, as they explored their local environments with acute sensitivity, were bound to discover plants that affected the human body in specific, useful ways. Energy, relief from respiratory illness, and ritual focus are universal human needs, and nature, in its infinite variety, offered similar keys on different continents. It is a testament to the shared, inquisitive spirit of humanity. Yet, the contact hypothesis offers a different, equally fascinating narrative. Could knowledge of these plants or the plants themselves have been transferred? Proponents point to the theoretical maritime routes we have already discussed. If people were crossing the Pacific, exchanging sweet potatoes and chickens, why not exchange medicinal knowledge? A traveler suffering from the cold and damp of a long voyage might be introduced to ephedra in Asia and carry that knowledge, or even the plant, back to the Americas, or vice versa. The stimulant properties would have been immediately valuable for endurance on long journeys or for ritual ceremonies in new lands. There is no direct archaeological evidence, like an ephedra stem in a pre-Columbian Peruvian tomb, to prove this transfer. The case rests on the provocative pattern, the eerie mirror of need and solution. This exploration moves us beyond trade in objects and into the realm of intangible exchange, the sharing of environmental wisdom and healing practices. It hints at a possibility even more profound than the transfer of goods, the transfer of understanding. If our ancestors were connected, they were not just swapping crops, they were comparing notes on how to live, how to heal, and how to interpret the world through the plants that sustain them. This thread of shared knowledge, whether born of independent discovery or ancient conversation, weaves a more intricate picture of our past, suggesting that the roots of human ingenuity may be more intertwined than we ever dared to believe. A silhouette against the desert sky, a mountain of stone ascending to the heavens, this same form, this same reaching ambition, appears again in the jungles of Mesoamerica and the plains of Southeast Asia. The pyramid is perhaps the most visually arresting piece of evidence in our entire puzzle. A shape so powerful it seems to have emerged independently from the human imagination on opposite sides of the world. This architectural echo forms a cornerstone of the diffusionist argument, the idea that complex concepts can travel. We are not looking at simple piles of earth, but at sophisticated, monumental structures built with precise alignments, serving profound religious and astronomical functions. The question they pose is silent and massive. Are these similar answers to universal human questions, or is this the spread of a single, revolutionary blueprint? Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed around 2,500 years before the Common Era. Its precision is still staggering, a near-perfect square base aligned to the cardinal directions with minute error, built from millions of limestone blocks. Its internal chambers and shafts point to specific stars, tying the pharaoh's journey to the cosmos. Now, shift your gaze to the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in Mexico, built roughly 2,000 years later. While constructed from earth and rubble faced with stone, its form is strikingly familiar, a massive stepped pyramid. It too is meticulously aligned, not to true north, but to a point 15 degrees east of north, an orientation that matches the setting of the Pleiades star cluster, sacred to the city's inhabitants. Both structures were the heart of vast ceremonial complexes, surrounded by plazas, smaller temples, and avenues, designed to orchestrate the movement of people in ritual space. The parallels extend even further. Architects and archaeologists like John Anthony West have long emphasized that this is not about crude resemblance, but about shared engineering principles. The use of tiered or stepped sides to achieve monumental height without collapse, the incorporation of internal chambers or tunnels, often aligned with solar or stellar events, and the symbolic ascent towards the realm of the gods or ancestors. These are deep structural and ideological commonalities. We see the pattern again at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, where the central temple mountain, though ornate and Buddhist in purpose, follows that same archetypal form of ascending tiers representing the mythical Mount Meru, the center of the universe. So how do we explain this global phenomenon? The traditional view, that of independent invention, is compelling in its own right. It argues that the pyramid shape is a logical, almost inevitable solution to a universal human challenge: how to build something tall, stable, and symbolically significant with pre-industrial technology. The impulse to reach for the sky, to commune with celestial powers, and to create a permanent, awe-inspiring marker of a culture's devotion could naturally lead different societies to the same basic geometrical form. The differences in material, construction method, and specific religious context support this idea of parallel development. Yet, the contact hypothesis asks us to look closer at the specifics. Is it just the shape, or is it the package of ideas that came with it? The precise astronomical alignments, the integration with urban planning, the association with ruler deification and cosmic renewal, these are complex cultural packages. Could the concept of the pyramid as a cosmological machine, not just a big tomb or temple, have been a transferable idea? Proponents suggest that if maritime contact occurred, the most lasting impression a traveler might carry home is not a small artifact, but the memory of an unimaginable structure, a vision of stone touching the stars. That vision could then seed inspiration in a new land, adapted to local gods, materials, and needs. The global pyramid phenomenon does not offer a simple answer, but it raises the stakes of our investigation. It moves us from comparing plants or art styles to comparing the very skeletons of civilizations, their most ambitious and enduring creations. Whether born of a shared human psyche or a shared ancient conversation, these structures stand as eternal reminders that our ancestors, wherever they were, looked up at the same night sky and felt the same profound urge to build their way into it. The night sky was humanity's first great library, a silent, luminous archive of time, cycles, and destiny. From every corner of the globe, our ancestors looked up and saw not random sparks, but patterns, stories, and a celestial clockwork that governed their world. They did more than just watch. They recorded what they saw with astonishing accuracy, etching the movements of the cosmos into the very landscape. When we find these astronomical alignments repeated across continents, separated by oceans and millennia, we must ask, was this knowledge independently discovered by each culture, or could it have been part of a shared, ancient science passed between them? This is where the evidence moves from stone and plant to the stars themselves. In the 1960s, an astronomer named Gerald Hawkins turned his telescope, so to speak, toward Stonehenge. Using early computer analysis, he proposed that the famous stone circle was not just a ritual site, but a sophisticated astronomical observatory. Its alignments, he argued, could predict solar and lunar events, even eclipses. While his specific conclusions are debated, he ignited a new way of seeing, revealing that our ancestors were meticulous scientists of the sky. Consider Newgrange in Ireland, a massive passage tomb older than the pyramids. For just a few minutes at dawn on the winter solstice, a narrow beam of sunlight pierces a specially constructed roof box and travels down a 60-foot passage to illuminate the inner chamber. This was not an accident, it was a feat of precise engineering and celestial observation, designed to capture the rebirth of the sun on the year's darkest day. Now cross the Atlantic to the Yucatan Peninsula. The Maya built the Caracol, a unique tower-like observatory at Chichen Itza. Its narrow windows are aligned to the extreme rising and setting points of Venus, a planet they tracked with obsessive precision. Their Venusian calendar, spanning hundreds of years, was accurate to within a few hours. They understood its cycles of morning and evening star appearances, weaving them into their mythology and timing their wars and rituals by its celestial dance. Even more strikingly, look to the Giza Plateau. Researchers like Robert Bovell have noted that the arrangement of the three main pyramids mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt as they appeared in the sky around 2,500 years before the Common Era. The Nile River in this correlation mirrors the Milky Way. This Orion correlation theory suggests the entire complex was a monumental star map, a permanent reflection of the pharaoh's journey to the eternal stars. The sophistication here is not merely in noticing a constellation, but in translating its precise geometry onto the ground at a colossal scale, a project requiring advanced understanding of both astronomy and surveying. This points to a profound truth: this star knowledge was not casual. It required generations of patient observation, the development of complex mathematics to calculate cycles, and a robust oral or early written tradition to preserve the data across centuries. It was a sacred science where priest astronomers held immense power because they could predict the turning of the seasons, the flooding of rivers, and the will of the gods written in the heavens. This is where the possibility of contact becomes especially compelling. If this knowledge could be preserved and transferred across generations within a culture, could it also be transferred across oceans? Consider the Polynesian star compass, a mental map of the sky used for navigation. Voyagers memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, using them as fixed bearings to sail across thousands of miles of open ocean. This was a living, practical astronomy. Did a Polynesian navigator, whose life depended on reading the stars, share his understanding with a Maya astronomer priest during a chance meeting on a foreign shore? Or could an Egyptian scholar, versed in the alignments of temples to Sirius, have conveyed those principles to builders in another land? The celestial thread connects the most practical human endeavor, navigation, with the most sacred temple science. It suggests that the language of the stars may have been a universal dialect among the learned elites of the ancient world. Whether independently deciphered or slowly shared along forgotten trade routes, these alignments point toward a shared intellectual heritage, a common human project to solve the mysteries of the cosmos and anchor our place within it. The stones they left behind are silent witnesses to that grand, collaborative search for meaning in the infinite dark. Words are the most intimate artifacts a culture leaves behind, the sounds that shaped its thoughts and named its world. When we listen closely across continents, we sometimes hear faint, haunting echoes, familiar syllables surfacing in the most unexpected places. These linguistic links form some of the most tantalizing and fiercely debated evidence for ancient contact, a puzzle built not from stone or bone, but from breath and meaning. The earliest hints came from the first European explorers and missionaries, as they painstakingly compiled dictionaries of indigenous American languages. They occasionally stumbled upon words that sounded strangely like terms from their own homelands or from distant lands they knew of. These were not just common sounds, but specific matches for concrete things, words for father, mother, son, or water that bore an uncanny resemblance to words in Hebrew, Greek, or even ancient Egyptian. To these observers, it seemed like a linguistic key to a biblical mystery, perhaps evidence of the lost tribes of Israel. While these early, often theological, interpretations have been largely set aside, the core observation lingers. Could these similarities be the faded footprints of very old conversations? To answer that, we must enter the careful, contentious world of comparative linguistics. This is the science of tracing relationships between languages, much like a biologist traces evolutionary trees. It operates on a principle called regular sound correspondence, the idea that when languages diverge from a common ancestor, their sounds change in predictable, systematic ways over centuries. It is not enough for two words to simply sound alike, like the English day and the Latin dies. They must follow a consistent pattern of change across many words in the vocabulary. This rigorous method has successfully reconstructed vast language families like Indo-European, which links languages from English to Sanskrit. The controversy enters when scholars attempt to apply this method across oceans and deep into prehistory. One of the most ambitious figures in this field was Joseph Greenberg. In the late 20th century, he proposed the Amarant hypothesis, arguing that most Native American languages, except the Nardine languages of the Northwest and the Eskimo Aleut languages of the far north, could be grouped into a single ancient superfamily. This theory, based on mass comparisons of basic vocabulary, was met with immediate and severe criticism from most mainstream linguists. They argued his method was not rigorous enough, that he was often comparing words that were superficial look-alikes without demonstrating the required systematic sound shift. The debate highlighted the immense methodological challenge. How do we distinguish a true genetic relationship from a chance resemblance, or from a word borrowed through contact much later in time? A borrowed word, like the English tomato from the Nahuatl tomato, is a souvenir of a single meeting, not proof of a shared ancestral language. To understand a potential deep link, we need to look at core, stable vocabulary, words for basic body parts, kinship terms, and fundamental natural elements that are less likely to be loaned. Let us examine a few specific echoes that have sparked curiosity. We have already encountered the sweet potato, with its Quechua name Kumara resonating in Polynesian Kumala. This is a strong candidate for a borrowed word, traveling with the tuber itself. Another example is the word for a common staple, the potato itself. In Quechua, it is papa. In various Polynesian languages, the word for a general tuber or for the introduced sweet potato is umara or similar forms. The similarity is striking, though again, it likely points to transfer of the crop and its name, not a deep linguistic kinship. More provocative are proposed links for more basic terms. Some researchers have pointed to similarities between certain Algonquian language words and roots in ancient Siberian languages or even Proto-Indo-European. For instance, the Algonquian word for a large body of water, something like michai in forms meaning great, has been compared to words meaning great or big in other far-flung families. These are the kinds of matches that fuel speculation about incredibly ancient population movements and contacts, stretching back to the very peopling of the continents. To appreciate how radical such connections would be, consider the contrasting case of Basque. Spoken in the Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain, Basque is a true linguistic isolate. It has no demonstrable relationship to any other living language on Earth, a remnant of a pre-Indo-European world that has survived in a mountainous refuge. Its uniqueness is accepted because it is surrounded by unrelated languages. Its isolation is geographic and clear. For a similar deep connection to exist between, say, a language in the Americas and one in Asia, we would have to imagine a connection so old that all other traces of the shared ancestral language have vanished, leaving only these ghostly echoes in a handful of words. So, what are we to make of these scattered lexical matches? Could they be the fossilized remnants of ancient contact, the last surviving whispers of a time when those now separated peoples shared a common tongue or traded words along a forgotten route? Or are they simply the product of coincidence, the inevitable outcome of the limited range of sounds the human voice can make to describe common things? The field remains deeply divided. For every proposed transoceanic link, skeptics can often point to statistical probability or an alternative, local explanation. Yet the echoes persist, refusing to be silenced. They remind us that language is not a static artifact, but a living, traveling entity. If people moved, their words moved with them. And if some of those words took root in new soil, they became permanent, living testaments to a meeting that history otherwise forgot. This search through the echoes of speech brings us to the most personal evidence of all, the physical remains of the travelers themselves, waiting to tell their stories in a language we are only just learning to hear. The most direct testimony lies not in artifacts or words, but in the silent architecture of the people themselves. Within the careful curves and ridges of an ancient skull, physical anthropologists read stories of ancestry and journey. For decades, certain skeletal remains found across the Americas have whispered a puzzling narrative, one that challenges simple models of a single, uniform founding population. The most famous case emerged from the muddy banks of the Columbia River in Washington state. Known as Kennewick Man, his nearly complete skeleton was dated to over 9,000 years ago. When scientists like Douglas Ousley of the Smithsonian Institution conducted a detailed analysis of the cranial morphology, the shape and measurements of the skull, they noted features that appeared distinct from those of modern Native American populations. Some researchers initially described the morphology as having Caucasoid affinities, a term that sparked immediate controversy and misunderstanding. This terminology, rooted in outdated racial classifications, was a scientific descriptor of shape, not a claim about identity or origin, but it ignited a firestorm. The local tribes for whom the Columbia River is sacred ancestral land saw him as a relation, an ancient forebear, and sought to reclaim the remains for burial under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. A lengthy legal and ethical battle ensued, pitting scientific inquiry against cultural sovereignty and spiritual belief. After years of study and litigation, subsequent genetic testing provided a clearer answer. The DNA extracted from Kennewick Man revealed he was, in fact, most closely related to contemporary Native Americans, particularly groups from the region. His distinctive cranial features, then, were not proof of a separate European migration, but rather evidence of the great physical diversity that existed among the earliest populations of the Americas, diversity that has smoothed over time. This case is a masterclass in the complexity of osteological evidence. It shows that a skull alone cannot tell a simple story. It must be read in concert with genetics, archaeology, and deep respect for living cultures. Further south, another skull prompted similar re-evaluation. In Brazil, the remains of a woman nicknamed Luzia, dating back approximately 11,500 years, were found with features that some physical anthropologists described as australoid, suggesting possible ancestral links to populations in Australia or Melanesia. Again, cranial morphology suggested a surprising pattern. Later genetic studies, however, have not found direct DNA links to those specific groups. Instead, scientists now believe Luzia's people were part of an early, diverse wave of migration into the Americas, whose distinct physical traits may have been lost or diluted through later population movements and mixing. This pattern repeats in the Paracu remains of Baja California, individuals who lived much later but exhibited a similarly robust and distinct cranial form, isolated on the peninsula until recent centuries. What do these bones tell us? They are not necessarily proof of transoceanic contact from Europe or the Pacific in later times. Rather, they are profound evidence that the peopling of the Americas was a more complex, multi-staged process than a single land bridge crossing. Some of these early lineages may represent pioneering groups whose genetic signatures faded, not vanished, into the broader tapestry. Modern genetic research into founding populations supports this mosaic. Studies of ancient DNA reveal multiple migratory pulses and a deep history of population structure and interaction within the Americas long before any potential later contact. So when we look at a skull like Kennewick Man's, we are not looking at a lone European traveler. We are looking at a testament to ancient journeys of an immense scale, journeys that populated continents. His story and the stories of Lucia and the Parakou steer us away from looking for singular, anomalous visitors and toward appreciating the dynamic, fluid nature of human movement itself. If the continents were connected by these deep time population flows, is it so difficult to believe that later, smaller-scale voyages could have woven new threads into that existing tapestry? The bones tell us that movement is in our very nature, and if people moved, they needed vessels capable of defying the open ocean. The ocean demands a vessel worthy of its challenge. To believe in ancient voyages, we must first believe in ancient boats, not as crude logs tied together, but as sophisticated technology born from intimate knowledge of wind, water, and fiber. This proof came not from a dusty museum case, but from a living, daring experiment on the open sea. In 1947, a Norwegian adventurer named Thor Heyerdahl and 5 companions pushed a balsa wood raft named Kon-Tiki off the coast of Peru. Their goal was audaciously simple: to demonstrate that such a craft, using only materials and techniques available in pre-Columbian times, could survive the 4,300-mile journey across the Pacific to Polynesia. For 101 days, they rode the Humboldt Current westward, battling storms, sharks, and the sheer psychological weight of the endless horizon. When they finally crashed onto a reef in the Tuamotu Islands, they had done more than complete an epic adventure. They had shattered a deep-seated academic assumption. Heyerdahl was always careful to frame his achievement. He famously stated that his voyage proved only that such a journey was possible, not that it had definitively happened. Yet in the realm of historical possibility, that distinction is everything. By showing it could be done, he forced the world to ask a new question. If it was possible, then why wouldn't curious, capable people have tried it? The Kon-Tiki was a specific answer to a Pacific puzzle, but it opened a window onto a global truth. Our ancestors were not landlubbers afraid of the deep. They were engineers of the waves. Around the world, we find a stunning variety of ocean-going craft, each perfectly adapted to its environment. The ancient Egyptians built sleek ships from bundled papyrus reeds, vessels capable of trading along the Red Sea and possibly beyond. In the Pacific, Polynesian voyagers perfected the double-hulled canoe, or wakolua. These were not simple dugouts, but massive, sewn-plank catamarans, sometimes over 100 feet long, capable of carrying families, livestock, and provisions for voyages lasting weeks. Their stability and speed were unmatched. Meanwhile, on the high-altitude Lake Titicaca, the Euro's people have for centuries built boats from totora reeds, the very same material found in archaeological sites along the arid coast of Peru. The leap of imagination is not great, from a lake boat to a coastal vessel, and then to one brave enough to follow a rich current out to sea. The construction was a masterclass in applied physics. These boats relied on flexibility and buoyancy. Bundled reeds or lightweight balsa logs provided natural flotation. The lashings and bindings made from plant fibers gave the structure a crucial give, allowing it to flex with the swells rather than shatter against them. Sails woven from matting or cloth harnessed the wind, while long steering paddles provided direction. But the vessel itself was only half the technology. The other half existed in the mind of the navigator. Without compasses or charts, these ancient mariners read the world itself. They memorized the star paths, knowing that specific stars rose and set over particular islands. They watched the patterns of ocean swells, feeling how they refracted around unseen land masses. They followed the flight paths of seabirds at dusk, knowing they would return to land. They tasted the salinity of the water and observed the drift of vegetation. This was a living science passed down through chants and apprenticeships, a mental map of the Pacific that was arguably more reliable than early European charts. They understood the great oceanic conveyor belts, the Kuroshio current curling past Japan, the Humboldt flowing up from Antarctica along South America. These were not barriers but highways. The most profound proof of ancient seafaring prowess lies in the very first human arrival in Australia. Archaeological evidence confirms that people made that crossing over the sea from Southeast Asia more than 50,000 years ago during the last ice age. This was not a casual island hop. It required a deliberate voyage across open water, visible from no shore. If humanity possessed that capability so deep in our past, how could we assume it was lost or never again employed in the millennia that followed? The reality is inescapable. The technological capability for long-distance ocean travel existed in multiple cultures across multiple eras. This shifts the entire debate from a question of fantasy to one of probability. If the boats could make the journey and the navigators could guide them, then the ocean was not a wall but a door. And if that door was open, even occasionally, what passed through it? We have been preoccupied with the vessels themselves, the sturdy hulls and the woven sails. But the true cargo of these voyages was far more precious and transformative than any physical object they could carry. It was the cargo of the mind, the invisible exchange of ideas that could reshape a civilization. A symbol can travel farther and last longer than any ship. Across millennia and continents, simple geometric forms appear again and again, etched into stone, painted on pottery, and woven into ritual. They seem to speak a silent, universal language. The spiral winding into itself and the swastika with its bent arms are two of the most persistent and globally distributed symbols in human history. Their recurrence presents a fascinating puzzle. Are they born from the shared architecture of the human mind, or are they the scattered fragments of an ancient, shared idea that once traveled the world? To explore this, we must first understand their profound psychological grip. Mythologists like Joseph Campbell spoke of archetypes, fundamental symbols and story patterns that emerge independently across cultures, arising from the deep well of shared human experience. The spiral and the swastika could be perfect examples of this. They are not depictions of things seen in nature, like a horse or a tree, but are abstract representations of powerful, universal forces that every culture grapples with: the turning of the cosmos, the cycle of life, and the path of the sun. The spiral is a shape of mesmerizing depth. In Neolithic Ireland, it is carved into the great stones of Newgrange, a tomb older than the pyramids, where it may symbolize the journey of the soul or the eternal cycles of rebirth. In ancient China, spirals adorn pottery from the Yongshao culture, possibly representing water, clouds, or celestial motion. Across the ocean, the ancestral pueblones of the American Southwest painted intricate spirals on canyon walls, which some researchers believe served as solar calendars, marking the solstices with shifting light and shadow. For the Maori of New Zealand, the spiral, or koru, is a core artistic motif derived from an unfurling fern frond and symbolizing new life, growth, and harmony. From the Vinca culture of prehistoric Europe to the temples of Mesopotamia, the spiral appears as a symbol of cosmic energy, the whirl of creation, and the labyrinthine path to the sacred center. Its meaning is adaptable, yet its visual power is constant. The swastika carries an even heavier historical burden, yet its ancient story is one of light, not darkness. For thousands of years before its tragic appropriation in the 20th century, it was a near-universal symbol of well-being, the sun, and good fortune. Its name comes from the Sanskrit svastika, meaning conducive to well-being. In ancient India, it was a sacred symbol in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It appears on artifacts from Troy and ancient Greece. Crucially and independently, it was also a significant symbol for many Native American tribes. For the Hopi people of the American Southwest, the swastika, or Paleoclimate, is a deeply sacred icon. It represents the wandering clan, their migration journeys, and the four cardinal directions. It is used in rituals, woven into baskets, and drawn in sacred cornmeal during ceremonies. Its arms show the rotational movement of the sun and the cyclical nature of the seasons. The antiquity of these symbols is staggering. Instances of the swastika have been dated to over 10,000 years ago in Ukraine. The spiral appears in some of humanity's very first artistic expressions. They are found in contexts that are both ceremonial and decorative, blurring the line between sacred art and daily life. This leads to the core question of probability. Is it likely that dozens of cultures, completely isolated from one another, would independently invent not just a similar shape, but invest that same shape with such profound and parallel meanings, linking it to the sun, to life cycles, and to cosmic motion? The independent invention argument is strong. It suggests that the human brain, when contemplating infinity, cycles, and rotation, naturally arrives at these elegant geometric solutions. They are visually simple, easy to draw, and powerfully evocative, yet the diffusionist perspective offers a haunting alternative. Could a symbol as specific as the swastika, with its precise right-angle arms and rotational symmetry, have been transmitted? If ideas could travel with sweet potatoes or pottery designs, why not a symbolic concept? A traveler bearing a token marked with a spiral or swastika might share not just the design, but the cosmology it represents. The symbol becomes a portable piece of theology, adaptable to new lands but retaining its core resonance. The Hopi swastika is particularly compelling because it is not a decorative afterthought. It is central to their origin stories and ceremonial life. Its presence suggests a symbolic tradition of immense depth and antiquity in the Americas, one that parallels traditions across Eurasia. So are these symbols proof of contact, not in a definitive, evidentiary sense, but they are something perhaps more profound. They are evidence of a shared symbolic language. Whether that language was written into our collective unconscious at the dawn of human consciousness, or whether it was slowly whispered across continents by countless generations of travelers and traders, the result is the same. These persistent icons show us that our ancestors, wherever they were asking the same great questions and encoding the answers in the same visual poetry. They hint that before the written word, there was a shared lexicon of shapes that spoke of the turning world. And if symbols could travel, carrying such weighty meaning, then perhaps the most complex narratives of all, the great myths of floods and heroes, could have journeyed alongside them. The oldest stories we tell are often the most alike. A great flood covers the world, sparing only a chosen few who ride the rising waters in a vessel of salvation. This narrative is not owned by any single culture. It is a shared inheritance found from the dusty tablets of Mesopotamia to the oral epics of the Amazon and the creation songs of Aboriginal Australia. Comparative mythologists like David Leeming have spent careers mapping these archetypal patterns, revealing a global tapestry woven with strikingly similar threads. The details are what make this more than mere coincidence. Across traditions, a divine or supernatural force warns a righteous individual of the coming deluge. A directive is given: build an ark, a raft, a great canoe. The hero gathers his family and pairs of animals, preserving the continuity of life. After the waters recede, a bird is sent out, a raven, a dove, a hummingbird, to find the first signs of dry land. This is not just one story, it is a story told hundreds of times with local gods and local landscapes, but with an uncannily consistent plot. The pattern extends beyond floods. Many cultures tell of celestial twin heroes, often one wise and one impulsive. who venture into the underworld or slay monsters to bring order to the world. Nearly universal is the motif of the dragon or great serpent, a symbol of primordial chaos that must be defeated for creation to begin. So why do these specific narratives echo around the globe? Scholars offer three compelling interpretations, each revealing a different layer of truth. The psychological view sees these as stories born from the shared human experience. The flood represents a cleansing, a rebirth, a psychological catharsis. The hero's journey mirrors our own internal struggles and triumphs. They are fundamental archetypes emerging from what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. The historical or environmental interpretation points to a tangible, worldwide event. Following the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise hundreds of feet, inundating continental shelves and coastal lands where early humans likely lived. This was not a 40-day event, but a slow, relentless drowning of the world as they knew it, spanning generations. Such a cataclysm would have been seared into cultural memory, passed down for millennia as the story of the Great Flood. Then there is the diffusionist perspective, which asks a daring question: could the story itself have traveled? If people were moving across oceans, they carried their myths with them. A flood story told in Mesopotamia could have been adapted by travelers in a new land, woven into local lore, and eventually become the story of the Maya Popol Vuh, or the legend of the Lac Kert Ore Ojibwe. This idea finds one of its most provocative echoes in a comparison of specific deities. From the Persian Gulf, ancient Sumerian texts speak of Ons, a strange, wise being who emerged from the sea. Ons was depicted as part man, part fish, a civilizing god who taught humanity the foundations of law, agriculture, and writing. Across the Atlantic and millennia later, the Mesoamerican god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was also a civilizing force. He was a bringer of knowledge, teaching people the calendar, agriculture, and the arts of civilization. In some accounts, Quetzalcoatl is described as a bearded, fair-skinned man who arrived from across the Eastern Sea and eventually departed, promising to return. The parallels are evocative: a benevolent, knowledge-bearing deity associated with serpents and the sea, arriving from a distant direction to instruct humanity. To suggest they are the same figure is a vast oversimplification, but to note the resonance is to acknowledge a fascinating pattern. Could such stories be the fossilized history of ancient encounters? Could the memory of a wise visitor from across the water, whether a historical figure, a shipwrecked sailor, or a symbolic representation of a new idea, have been preserved and deified over centuries of retelling? Myth, in this light, becomes more than parable. It becomes a potential vessel for historical truth, a way for pre-literate societies to encode and transmit profound experiences across generations. These stories were their libraries, their historical records. When we listen to them not as separate folktales but as fragments of a possible conversation, we begin to hear a different kind of evidence, one written not on clay or stone but on the human heart. And if the most abstract ideas, the very stories of creation, could have been exchanged, then the transfer of practical, tangible technology seems not just possible but inevitable. Gold does not merely shine, it speaks a language of power and precision understood across millennia. When Spanish conquistadors first entered the royal tombs of Peru's Moche and Sican cultures, they were met with a breathtaking sight, not just piles of raw treasure, but objects of impossible artistry. Delicate ear spools depicted intricate battle scenes, ceremonial knives bore faces of gods, and ritual cups seemed spun from sunlight itself. These were not hammered from nuggets, they were cast with a sophistication that rivaled the finest European goldsmiths of the era, using a technique the old world believed was its exclusive secret, the lost wax method. This was not a simple craft, it was a high art of transformation, requiring a deep, scientific understanding of materials. Archaeometallurgist Heather Lechman's pioneering work revealed the Andean approach as not just equal, but in some ways distinctively advanced. So how does this ancient magic work? The process begins with a core, often made of fine clay, sculpted into the exact shape of the desired object's hollow interior. This core is then coated in a layer of beeswax, and here the true artistry begins. The artisan sculpts the wax itself, carving every fine detail, every feather, every expression directly into this soft, forgiving medium. Once the wax model is perfect, it is encased in a thick outer mold of clay with small channels left open. The entire assembly is then fired in a kiln. The heat does two critical things. It hardens the clay mold into a ceramic shell, and it melts the wax which drains out through those channels, leaving behind a perfect, empty cavity within the hardened mold, a negative space in the exact shape of the original wax sculpture. This is the lost wax, giving the method its name. Finally, molten gold or copper alloy is poured into the void, filling every microscopic crevice. Once cooled, the outer clay mold is broken away, revealing a metal object that captures the sculptor's original vision with breathtaking fidelity. The brilliance of this method is its ability to produce complex, three-dimensional forms that could never be achieved by hammering alone. The discovery that this complex, multi-step process appeared in both ancient Mesopotamia and pre-Columbian America presents a classic puzzle. Did two cultures, separated by an ocean and millennia, independently arrive at this identical, elegant solution to the problem of casting metal? It is certainly possible, a testament to parallel human ingenuity when faced with the same material challenges. Yet, the plot thickens considerably when we turn to a metal far more enigmatic than gold. Along the coast of modern-day Ecuador, the La Tolita culture produced artifacts that defy simple explanation, tiny beads and ornaments made not of gold but of platinum. To a modern engineer, this is staggering. Platinum's melting point is over 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature impossible to achieve with ancient furnaces. So how did they work it? The La Tolita artisans employed a technique called sintering. They would take tiny, naturally occurring grains of platinum dust, mix them with a small amount of gold dust as a binder, and then subject the mixture to repeated heating and hammering. The gold would melt at a lower temperature, fusing the platinum particles together into a workable, cohesive mass. This was not simply melting a metal, it was a process of aggregation and bonding, a nanotechnology of the ancient world. The skill and observation required to discover this property, to recognize that these rare, heavy grains could be manipulated in such a way, speaks of a profound, experimental mastery over the material world. One technological parallel could be a coincidence, but two, involving such specialized knowledge, gives us pause. Does the presence of lost wax casting and platinum sintering in the Americas point to a transfer of complex artisanal science across the oceans? Or do they stand as twin monuments to the boundless, inventive spirit of humanity, capable of reaching the same heights in complete isolation? The shimmer of that ancient gold holds more than beauty, it holds a question about the very pathways of knowledge. And if such sophisticated technology could be shared or independently conceived, it makes the next category of evidence, objects that seem to belong to the wrong time and place entirely, feel less like impossible fantasies and more like pieces of a puzzle we are only beginning to assemble. In a quiet Georgia field, a modern monument briefly cast a long, strange shadow. The Georgia Guidestones, erected in 1980, were a cluster of massive granite slabs inscribed with 10 principles for humanity in 8 languages, from English and Spanish to ancient Babylonian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Their anonymous sponsor and cryptic messages, advocating for a global population in balance with nature, immediately sparked a whirlwind of speculation. To some, the use of ancient scripts was a direct signal, a clue that the builders were part of a secret society guarding lost historical wisdom, perhaps even knowledge of a unified, ancient global civilization. The stones became a magnet for theories, linking them to everything from ancient astronauts to prophecies of a new world order, a modern canvas onto which age-old mysteries were projected. This phenomenon reveals a powerful truth about our search for the past. The same human desire that drives legitimate inquiry into ancient contact can also fuel elaborate modern mythologies. The stones, tragically damaged and later demolished, were a contemporary riddle, but the narratives that engulfed them are part of a much older pattern. To understand this, we must listen to the voices of skepticism within archaeology itself. Scholars like Kenneth Feder, author of Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, have spent careers examining the allure of the extraordinary claim. He argues that while the questions are valid, many popular theories bypass the slow, meticulous work of evidence in favor of a more compelling story, one often built on a handful of common tropes. The first is the out-of-place artifact, an object that seems impossibly anachronistic or out of context, like a modern hammer found in ancient rock. These items captivate us because they promise a simple, revolutionary answer, but they frequently crumble under scrutiny, revealing modern origins, misidentifications, or misunderstood contexts. The second trope is the idea of a suppressed truth, a narrative that academia is deliberately hiding revolutionary discoveries to protect its own prestige and paradigms. This creates a compelling underdog story, positioning the theorist as a brave outsider fighting a rigid establishment. The third is the commercialization of mystery, where these speculative ideas are packaged into best-selling books, popular documentaries, and lucrative speaking tours, creating an ecosystem where the financial incentive is not for sober analysis, but for ever more sensational claims. The internet has amplified this cycle exponentially, allowing communities to form around shared beliefs, reinforcing them with a constant stream of curated content while often filtering out contradictory evidence. So why does the idea of a secretly connected ancient world hold such enduring power? It speaks to a deep human longing for a more romantic, unified past, a time of lost golden ages and wise ancestors whose knowledge we have forgotten. It can feel more satisfying than the complex, fragmented, and often ambiguous story that archaeology painstakingly reconstructs from pottery shards and soil layers. The Georgia Guidestones, in their brief existence, acted as a perfect mirror for this longing. Their use of ancient languages was likely intended to convey a message of timeless, universal wisdom, but for many it became a literal key, a sign that the builders possessed that hidden history. This brings us to a crucial juncture in our own investigation. The speculative narratives surrounding the stones and similar modern mysteries serve as a vital cautionary tale. They remind us that the pursuit of evidence for ancient exchange must be tempered with rigorous scientific scrutiny, a commitment to following the evidence wherever it leads, even if the destination is less spectacular than we hoped. The strongest counterarguments to transoceanic contact are not born from closed-mindedness, but from a demand for a high standard of proof, for multiple corroborating lines of evidence that can withstand the same level of skepticism we rightly apply to modern myths. As we move from the speculative allure of modern monuments back to the tangible artifacts of the deep past, we carry with us this dual awareness, the wonder that asks what if, and the discipline that asks how do we know. A profound and elegant counter-narrative waits in the wings of this debate, one that does not require crossing oceans to explain the echoes we hear. This is the story of independent invention, a perspective that celebrates the isolated, brilliant creativity of human societies. It suggests that our awe at these parallels should be directed not toward ancient sailors, but toward the shared, magnificent potential of the human mind itself. This view is not a simple dismissal. It is a robust framework built on decades of anthropological thought. At its heart lies the principle of psychic unity, the idea that all humans, regardless of where or when they lived, possess the same fundamental cognitive hardware. We observe the same sun, feel the same need for shelter, and ask the same questions about life and death. Given similar challenges and similar materials, is it any wonder we often arrive at similar answers? The great anthropologist Alfred L. Kroeber championed this view, emphasizing how environment and necessity shape culture in predictable ways, a process called convergent cultural evolution. Think of it like this: two children on opposite sides of the world, given a pile of blocks, will both eventually discover that stacking them in a pyramid is the most stable way to build something tall. They did not copy each other, they simply discovered the same physical truth. This principle applies to nearly every piece of evidence we have examined. The pyramid form is a perfect case study. With stone as your primary material and a desire to create a monumental structure that reaches toward the heavens, the pyramid is not just an option, it is a logical, perhaps inevitable, engineering solution. The stepped sides distribute weight, the wide base provides stability, and the ascending shape creates a powerful symbolic pathway from earth to sky. That this form emerged in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and Southeast Asia is not proof of contact, but proof of shared human logic confronting the same laws of physics and the same spiritual yearning. Even our botanical mystery, the sweet potato, has potential explanations within this framework. While the natural drifting of a viable tuber across the Pacific is highly unlikely, some botanists have not entirely ruled out the possibility of seeds being carried by birds or floating on mats of vegetation over immense timescales. More importantly, the independent domestication of plants is a global phenomenon that underscores this principle of parallel genius. Scholars have identified at least 7 separate regions around the world where agriculture was invented independently, from the Fertile Crescent with its wheat and barley, to China with its rice, to the Andes with its potatoes and quinoa, to Mesoamerica with its maize. Each society, observing the plants in their local environment, made the same cognitive leap from foraging to cultivation. This was not a transferred idea. It was a revolution that happened again and again. The same holds true for pottery. The discovery that clay, when fired, becomes hard and waterproof was made independently on every inhabited continent. The shapes might vary, but the fundamental technology emerged from the same process of experimentation with local materials. This perspective asks us to consider the limitations our ancestors faced. They had a finite set of resources: stone, wood, fiber, clay. They faced universal needs: secure food, protection from the elements, ways to explain the universe, and methods to honor their dead. When you combine common needs with limited materials, the range of possible solutions narrows dramatically. A dugout canoe or a reed boat is not evidence of contact. It is evidence that buoyancy is a universal property, and hollowing out a log or tying reeds together is the most straightforward way to harness it. So, could the awe we feel when we see a pyramid in Egypt and another in Mexico be a testament not to a shared history, but to a shared humanity? This counter-narrative is powerful because it is rooted in a deep respect for the adaptive brilliance of every culture. It sees the ancient world not as a network of travelers, but as a gallery of independent masterpieces, each painting created by a different artist who had never seen the other's work, yet somehow captured the same beautiful themes. To fully weigh the possibility of contact, we must hold this elegant, disciplined viewpoint in one hand and the collection of puzzling artifacts in the other, and ask which one feels heavier. A genuine artifact carries its history within its very substance, but a forgery tells a different story, one of the time and place it was actually made. The search for evidence of ancient contact has always walked a parallel path with deception, a shadow history of hoaxes and misinterpretations that has, for centuries, clouded the waters of genuine inquiry. To navigate this landscape, we must first confront these shadows, understanding not just what evidence exists, but how it can be fabricated or misunderstood. Our journey begins not in an ancient tomb, but in a 19th-century Iowa town, with a discovery that captivated the nation before crumbling under scrutiny. In 1874, in the town of Davenport, 3 stone tablets were unearthed from a burial mound. They were covered in what appeared to be a mix of Egyptian hieroglyphics and ancient Hebrew characters, depicting scenes that seemed to show a funeral procession and celestial events. For a public fascinated by the mysterious mound builders, the Davenport tablets were a sensation. They appeared to offer irrefutable proof that old-world civilizations had reached the American heartland. Prominent figures, including a local pastor and a respected surveyor, championed their authenticity. Yet, from the start, there were whispers. Critical scholars noted that the inscriptions were a jumble of symbols from different eras and cultures, a pastiche that no ancient scribe would have created. The final blow came when investigators revealed that the tablets' discoverers had access to popular books on ancient languages and that the artifacts had been planted. The Davenport tablets were a classic hoax, born from a mix of local pride, religious fervor, and the era's potent desire to find a grand, biblical narrative in the American soil. This case is a cornerstone for skeptics like researcher Jason Colavito, who emphasizes that such claims must be understood within their cultural context. The 19th century was a time of intense speculation about the origins of Native American peoples, often framed through a Eurocentric or biblical lens. Artifacts like the Davenport tablets provided a convenient, if fraudulent, answer that aligned with the prejudices and desires of the moment, not with the archaeological record. To separate the wheat from the chaff, we need a forensic toolkit for evaluating any extraordinary claim. The first and most critical tool is provenance. Where exactly was the object found, by whom, and under what conditions? A solid provenance includes detailed records, photographs of the artifact in situ, and verification by multiple, unbiased observers. An artifact that appears mysteriously on the antiquities market with no clear origin story immediately carries a heavier burden of proof. The second tool is peer review and reproducibility. Is the analysis published in a reputable scientific journal where other experts can examine the methods and data? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that evidence must withstand the rigorous, often skeptical, scrutiny of the broader academic community. The third is contextual archaeology. Does the artifact fit with other materials found at the site? A single Hebrew-inscribed tablet in a mound otherwise filled with typical indigenous pottery and tools is an anomaly that demands explanation, but it is more likely to be an intrusion or a forgery than proof of a visiting scribe. Finally, we must apply Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation consistent with the facts is often the best. Is it more likely that a complex transoceanic voyage occurred, or that a local artisan carved something unusual? This is not about dismissing possibilities, but about weighing probabilities with intellectual honesty. Several common cognitive pitfalls constantly threaten to lead us astray. The first is pareidolia, our brain's hardwired tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. We see a face on Mars or a chariot in a cloud formation. In archaeology, this can manifest as seeing specific letters or symbols in natural rock weathering or in abstract indigenous art, interpreting them as foreign writing. The second is confirmation bias, our subconscious habit of seeking out and valuing information that confirms what we already believe, while dismissing or ignoring evidence that contradicts it. If we are convinced of ancient contact, every vague similarity becomes proof, and every contrary fact becomes part of a cover-up. The third pitfall is the appeal to authority from non-experts. A famous actor or a charismatic speaker promoting a theory does not make it true. Expertise in one field does not translate to expertise in archaeology or linguistics. The final and perhaps most damaging pitfall is the fragmentation of evidence. This involves presenting a collection of weak, ambiguous pieces as a strong case, arguing that while no single item is conclusive, the collective weight is overwhelming. This approach often combines genuine artifacts, misunderstood objects, and outright hoaxes into a persuasive but fundamentally flawed narrative. No case illustrates the scale of deception better than the Michigan relics. Between the 1890s and the 1920s, over 3,000 lead, clay, and copper objects were discovered across Michigan. They were inscribed with a bewildering array of symbols, mixing Egyptian, Greek, and fake hieroglyphs, and depicting everything from biblical figures to prehistoric elephants. They were touted as proof of a lost pre-Native American civilization in North America. The relics were eventually exposed as the work of a single forger, motivated by profit and perhaps a warped sense of regional pride. They were crude, anachronistic, and chemically modern, yet they fooled many people for decades because they told a story people wanted to believe. This massive fraud serves as a sobering monument to how greed, nationalism, and wishful thinking can manufacture an entire false history. So, as we reflect on the evidence we have explored, from the Bat Creek stone to the Fuente Magna bowl, we must ask how many might bear the subtle fingerprints of a later hand, or simply be victims of our own eager pattern-seeking minds. This forensic examination is not meant to end the conversation, but to sharpen it. By understanding how evidence can be faked or misread, we become better equipped to recognize what might, against all odds, be genuine. It prepares us to look past the noise and focus on the signal, however faint it may be. 20,000 years ago, the world was a different map. Vast sheets of ice locked away immense volumes of water, and the oceans retreated, revealing continents with unfamiliar silhouettes. Where the North Sea churns today, a fertile plain called Doggerland stretched from Britain to Europe, home to hunter-gatherers who tracked herds across its gentle hills. In Southeast Asia, the islands of Indonesia were connected into a sprawling continental shelf known as Sunderland. Most significantly for our story, the lowered sea levels exposed the Bering Land Bridge, a 1,000-mile-wide corridor of tundra that served as a highway for the peopling of the Americas. This was the last glacial maximum, an epoch where coastlines extended hundreds of miles farther out, creating new pathways and perhaps new opportunities for connection. The Earth itself was an active participant, reshaping the stage upon which our ancestors moved. This field of study, paleoclimatology, offers not just a backdrop, but a crucial key to understanding the feasibility and the profound silence surrounding ancient voyages. As the great ice sheets began to melt, starting around 14,000 years ago, the seas rose in what scientists call meltwater pulses, rapid surges that could raise global sea levels by several meters per century. This was not a gentle, linear process, but a series of dramatic inundations that would have reshaped human geography within just a few generations. Imagine a community living on a rich coastal plain, its memory and history tied to that land, watching over decades as the shore crept steadily inward, swallowing familiar hunting grounds, sacred sites, and eventually their very homes. This global flooding event is a scientific consensus, and it forces a humbling realization. If early coastal civilizations existed, or if early voyages departed from now submerged shorelines, the most compelling archaeological evidence would be under hundreds of feet of water. This is where the work of researchers like Graham Hancock enters the conversation, popularizing the provocative idea of a lost, advanced maritime culture from this forgotten epoch. While mainstream archaeology disputes the advanced label and demands concrete evidence, the underlying geological premise is sound. the most likely corridors for early human expansion and potential contact are now on the ocean floor. Let's look at specific shelves. The Sunderland Shelf was a vast tropical peninsula during the Ice Age. As sea levels rose, it fragmented into the thousands of islands of modern Indonesia and Malaysia, potentially isolating populations and spurring the development of the remarkable maritime skills we see in later Polynesian cultures. Their epic voyages may have roots in a necessity born of drowning landscapes. In the North Atlantic, the story of Doggerland is a proven cautionary tale. Archaeologists have dredged up animal bones, stone tools, and even evidence of campfires from the seabed, confirming that a rich human landscape was indeed lost to the waves around 6,200 years ago. Even more telling is the discovery at Boldner Cliff, off the coast of England. There, underwater archaeologists found a submerged Mesolithic site preserving worked wood and tools dating back over 8,000 years, a snapshot of technology from a coastline that no longer exists. If such sites can be found in the cold, turbid waters of the North Sea, what might lie off the more stable, sediment-rich coasts of India, the Persian Gulf, or the Americas? The continental shelves are the largest unexplored archaeological sites on the planet. For the possibility of transoceanic contact, this changes everything. A voyage from Southeast Asia to South America 20,000 years ago would not have required crossing the vast open Pacific we see today. It could have been a series of shorter hops along now submerged island chains or coastal routes that are utterly invisible to us. A journey across the Atlantic from Africa might have skirted a coastline that extended far beyond today's shore, making the open water crossing much shorter. The rising seas did not just make travel harder, they erased the launch pads and the landing sites. They swallowed the ports, the coastal villages, and the material proof of those who might have looked at the horizon and wondered what lay beyond it. This adds a profound layer of tragedy and possibility to our search. We are not just looking for needles in a haystack, we are looking for needles at the bottom of the ocean, buried under millennia of silt. The silence in the archaeological record, the absence of conclusive proof, may not be evidence of absence, but evidence of a global cataclysm that gently, inexorably, hid the answers. Could the most compelling chapter of human connection have been written on shores that are now forever silent, their stories whispered only in the currents that flow over them? This realization shifts our gaze from the land we know to the drowned world we can only imagine, a realm that holds the final, perhaps unreachable, clues to the ancient map of humanity. The story of our past is now being written in a language we could never have imagined, a code hidden within the fragile architecture of bone itself. This is the frontier of archaeogenetics, a revolutionary science that peers into the deepest corridors of human history by reading the minuscule fragments of DNA preserved in ancient remains. It is a field that promises hard data where once we had only speculation, offering molecular answers to our oldest questions about who we are and where we came from. The journey began in earnest with a monumental achievement, the sequencing of the Neanderthal genome. For the first time, scientists could read the genetic blueprint of a different kind of human, and they discovered something astonishing. Our own DNA in people of non-African descent carries a small but significant percentage of Neanderthal genes. This was not just evidence of coexistence, it was proof of interbreeding, a tangible, biological record of intimate contact between different human groups tens of thousands of years ago. This discovery, led by pioneers like Svante Pääbo, shattered the old idea of pristine, separate human lineages. It proved that mixing, sharing, and connection are woven into the very fabric of our species' story. If genetics could reveal such profound connections in deep prehistory, what could it tell us about more recent transoceanic possibilities? To answer that, we must step into the pristine, hyper-clean environment of an ancient DNA laboratory. Here, scientists clad in full-body suits work with samples that are priceless not in gold but in information. The process is a delicate dance with decay. DNA begins to break down the moment an individual passes, and over centuries or millennia, only tiny, damaged fragments survive. The first and greatest challenge is contamination, as modern DNA from archaeologists, handlers, or even the air can easily swamp the ancient signal. Researchers therefore target the hardest tissues like the petrous bone of the inner ear, which can better preserve genetic material. They chemically treat the samples to remove contaminants, then use sophisticated sequencing machines to read the shattered genetic code, piece by piece, rebuilding a genome like the world's most complex puzzle. The insights from this painstaking work have been transformative. In the Americas, genetic studies have clarified the broad outline of human arrival. They confirm that the primary ancestors of today's indigenous peoples descended from populations in Siberia who crossed the Bering Land Bridge, likely in multiple waves beginning around 15,000 years ago. The work of geneticists like David Reich at Harvard has mapped the complex branching of these populations as they moved south, diversified, and populated 2 continents. Yet, this genetic map also holds intriguing blank spots and puzzling signals. One of the most significant findings is the consistent absence of certain Old World genetic lineages, like those common in Europe or Africa, in any pre-Columbian American samples studied so far. This genetic silence is a powerful argument against large-scale, sustained contact that would have left a widespread demographic impact. If shiploads of Romans or Phoenicians had settled in the Americas, their genetic signature should, in theory, be visible. Its absence suggests that any contact that did occur was likely small in scale, perhaps involving limited numbers of voyagers who did not leave a lasting genetic legacy in the broader population. However, genetics also points to mysteries within the American story itself. Some studies suggest evidence of a very early, unsampled population, sometimes called Population Y, whose genetic ghost appears in some Amazonian groups and seems to share distant ancestry with indigenous Australians and Papuans. This hints at a far more complex peopling process than a single migratory wave, possibly involving earlier, different journeys along Pacific coastlines, journeys now lost to time and rising seas. Specific case studies bring these threads into sharp focus. Analysis of human remains from Lovelock Cave in Nevada revealed individuals with a genetic ancestry linking them to other ancient groups across North America, showing broad connections across the continent. In Brazil, studies of the Botacudo people, whose remains date to the last few centuries, showed an unexpected presence of Polynesian mitochondrial DNA lineages, a startling finding that suggests a later, perhaps post-Columbian, connection across the Pacific that historians had not documented. But the most direct genetic evidence for pre-Columbian contact comes from the other side of the ocean. In 2020, a landmark study was published in the journal Nature. Researchers analyzing the DNA of modern Polynesian populations found a clear, though small, signal of Native American ancestry, specifically linked to the indigenous peoples of coastal Colombia and Ecuador. Crucially, they dated this mixing event to approximately the year 1200 of the Common Era, centuries before Europeans entered the Pacific. This is not a vague artifact or a debated inscription. It is a biological fact written in the living cells of people today. It strongly suggests that Polynesian voyagers reached the shores of South America and returned home, or that South Americans ventured into the Pacific and that families were formed, leaving a legacy that endured. So, does this genetic revolution close the door on early transoceanic contact or leave it open? The answer is nuanced and profoundly important. Genetics has effectively ruled out the grand, sweeping narratives of lost tribes or colonizing fleets from the ancient Old World. It tells us that the foundational population of the Americas was, and remained, distinctly of Siberian origin. Yet, with the Polynesian-American connection, it has also provided one of the strongest single pieces of evidence that deliberate, successful voyages did indeed occur across the world's greatest ocean. It suggests that contact was likely episodic, small-scale, and perhaps bidirectional, more like the occasional exchange of ideas between distant neighbors than a mass migration. The genetic story does not end the conversation, it refines it. It guides us away from looking for lost civilizations and toward a more subtle, human-scale understanding. It asks us to consider not whether people could cross the ocean, but how often they did, and what happened when a few of them, against all odds, actually arrived. The book of our past, written in bone and blood, is still being decoded, and each new sequence adds a sentence, a word, a clarifying punctuation mark to the epic poem of human connection. A ribbon of emerald green once traced the northern rim of the Pacific, a submerged forest swaying with the currents. This was the Kelp Highway, a theory that reimagines the ancient map not as a forbidding ocean to be crossed, but as a fertile, familiar coastline to be followed. Proposed by archaeologists like John Erlandson, this idea weaves genetics, ecology, and archaeology into a single, elegant narrative for how people and their knowledge first moved into the Americas. It suggests that the earliest pioneers were not just hardy hunters tracking mammoths across a frozen bridge, but savvy mariners who knew how to read the water's edge. For over 10,000 miles from the icy shores of Japan, along the Aleutian Islands, and down the Pacific coast of the Americas, stretched a near-continuous belt of kelp forest ecosystems. These underwater jungles are among the most productive environments on Earth, teeming with fish, shellfish, sea mammals, and seabirds. They offered a predictable, rich larder for people who understood how to harvest it. The theory posits that early communities, already adapted to maritime life in Northeast Asia, slowly expanded eastward in simple skin boats or dugout canoes. They did not need to brave the open ocean, they could island hop, always keeping land in sight, moving from one abundant coastal refuge to the next. This was not a desperate sprint, but a gradual, generational exploration fueled by abundance, not scarcity. The evidence for this coastal migration is etched in stone and shell. Along this proposed route, archaeologists find strikingly similar toolkits, particularly tiny, razor-sharp stone blades called microblades. These were often set into slots in bone or antler points to create deadly, efficient hunting weapons. This technological signature appears in ancient sites from Siberia to Alaska and down the northwest coast, suggesting a shared knowledge system that traveled with people. Furthermore, the earliest confirmed sites in the Americas, like Monte Verde in southern Chile, are not inland hunting camps but coastal settlements. Dated to over 14,500 years ago, centuries older than the famous Clovis sites of North America, Monte Verde contained remains of seaweed, shellfish, and other marine resources alongside evidence of inland plant gathering. It paints a picture of a community intimately familiar with both land and sea, a hallmark of a coastal adaptation. The Kelp Highway model does more than explain initial peopling. It provides a framework for understanding how knowledge could flow across vast distances long after the first arrivals. If communities remained connected along this maritime corridor, sharing technologies, stories, and genetic material through trade and interaction, then the coastal fringe became a dynamic information superhighway. Innovations in boat design, navigation techniques, or fishing methods could diffuse gradually along this network. This makes the later, more daring transoceanic voyages we have discussed seem less like impossible leaps and more like natural extensions of an ancient coast-hugging tradition. It connects the dots between the earliest coastal foragers and the later Polynesian master navigators, suggesting a deep, unbroken lineage of maritime skill. Could the monumental idea exchange between continents have begun not with a single, storm-tossed raft in mid-ocean, but with countless, quiet conversations between canoe families meeting where the kelp forests were thickest? This theory elegantly bridges the gap between land and sea migrations, reminding us that the ocean's edge is not a boundary, but a place of immense possibility. It shifts our focus from the terrifying emptiness of the deep Pacific to the life-giving richness of its fringing shores, where the human journey may have always been, first and foremost, a coastal story. Curiosity may be the oldest cargo a ship can carry. Historians often speak of an exploration imperative, a deep-seated drive within us to see what lies beyond the next hill, the next river, the next horizon line. This is not a modern invention. It is woven into our species' DNA, a restless energy that propelled our ancestors out of Africa and across the continents. But to understand the voyages we have been tracing, we must move beyond the abstract and into the human heart. What specific dreams, needs, or accidents could convince a person to load a boat with supplies, say farewell to everything they knew, and point its prow toward an endless blue unknown? The ethnobotanist and explorer Wade Davis offers a profound lens, suggesting that culture itself is not just a set of traditions, but a unique response to the human imagination. Different environments and histories spark different dreams, and some of those dreams are of distant shores. Consider the powerful lure of trade. We know that even in antiquity, rare and exotic goods held immense value, not just materially, but socially and spiritually. A single scarlet feather from a tropical bird, a nugget of unusual metal, or a fragrant spice could signify status, connection to the divine, or political power. The desire to obtain such treasures could motivate incredibly risky ventures. Think of the Viking expansion, driven in part by the hunt for walrus ivory, furs, and new lands for settlement. Or the famed Silk Road, a testament to the lengths humans will travel to connect markets. Is it so difficult to imagine a similar drive compelling a coastal chief in Southeast Asia to send a vessel eastward, seeking the source of rumored golden ornaments or vibrant dyes? Another potent motivator was the realm of spirit and story, religious pilgrimage, the search for sacred sites, or the missionary zeal to spread a belief system have moved populations across mountains and deserts throughout history. Could a group of devout individuals have set sail to find a mythical promised land, or to carry their teachings to new peoples? The Irish legend of Saint Brendan the Navigator tells of a 6th century monk who, according to the tales, sailed across the Atlantic in a leather curragh seeking the Isle of the Blessed. While the story is mythic, it captures a very real medieval mindset where faith could justify a journey into the utter unknown. For the Polynesians, the motivation was often a blend of necessity and profound ancestral connection. Their oral histories speak of seeking new islands as resources dwindled on old ones, a practical push. But they also navigated by the stars toward a legendary homeland, Hawaii, a place both geographical and spiritual. Their voyages were acts of survival, yes, but also acts of cultural memory, a returning to origins across the waves. Then there are the harder, darker pushes. Conflict, exile, or the simple accident of a storm. A group on the losing side of a local war might flee to the sea as a last resort. A fishing boat caught in a gale could be blown hundreds of miles off course, surviving to make landfall on a continent they never knew existed. These are not planned expeditions of discovery, but they are perhaps the most likely initial contacts of all, the unintended meetings that could, if the survivors stayed and were welcomed, plant the first seed of a new connection. So what filled the sails of those first pioneers? It was likely a complex mixture, a recipe unique to each voyage. A dash of desperation, a cup of curiosity, a heavy measure of courage, and a guiding spoonful of story or dream. To reduce these journeys to mere accident strips them of their humanity. To ignore the role of accident is to ignore the chaotic beauty of history itself. By asking why, we complete the picture. We move from the technical puzzle of how they crossed the ocean to the intimate story of who they were and what they hoped to find. This understanding of the human drive transforms our view of the past from a map of static cultures into a chronicle of restless, hopeful, daring hearts. And if we can see those hearts beating across the millennia, it forces us to confront a final, deeply personal question. What does this interconnected past mean for who we are today? A single archaeological site in Newfoundland forever changed a chapter of our history books. Elance Oaks Meadows, with its unmistakable Norse artifacts, proved definitively that Viking explorers reached North America around the year 1000. That discovery did more than add a footnote. It shattered a long-held assumption of total isolation before Columbus. It forced a rewrite. Now, imagine that same paradigm shift, but on a global scale, across multiple centuries and cultures. If the accumulating evidence we have explored were fully validated, it would not merely add a few new pages to history. It would demand we reprint the entire volume with a different theme. The implications reach far beyond academic journals, touching the very core of how we see human identity and achievement. This is the power of a paradigm shift, a concept philosopher Thomas Kuhn described as a fundamental change in the basic concepts and practices of a scientific discipline. It occurs not when new facts trickle in, but when the weight of anomalies becomes too great for the old model to bear, and the entire framework of understanding cracks and reassembles into something new. The possibility of widespread pre-Columbian contact represents precisely such an anomaly for our historical narrative. The first and perhaps most profound impact would be a final dismissal of the persistent, harmful myth of the isolated savage. This outdated notion, often used to justify colonial actions, portrayed indigenous cultures of the Americas as static, primitive societies waiting to be discovered and set on the path of progress. Evidence of transoceanic exchange turns that idea on its head. It would show these cultures not as passive recipients, but as active, sophisticated participants in potential global networks. They would be seen as selective adapters taking foreign ideas, whether a new crop or a symbolic motif, and weaving them into their own unique cultural fabric, a process that requires intelligence and agency, not inferiority. This directly challenges Eurocentric narratives of discovery. The term discovery itself implies a blank slate, an empty land awaiting its first real history. But if the Americas were already part of an ancient web of conversation, then Columbus, Cabot, and others did not discover a new world. They stumbled into a very old conversation that had been ongoing for millennia. They became new, loud participants in a dialogue, not the authors of the first sentence. This re-evaluation would naturally extend to the Columbian Exchange, the massive transfer of plants, animals, and diseases that followed 1492. It would be reframed not as the first contact, but as the most recent, most devastating, and most documented chapter in a long, intermittent series of exchanges. The sweet potato in Polynesia and the potential chicken bones in Chile suggest that biological exchange had precedence. The Columbian Exchange would be seen as exponential and catastrophic in scale, but not unprecedented in kind. What would this mean for us today? The ripples would touch our classrooms. Educational curricula would need to shift from a story of isolated hemispheres colliding in 1492 to a more complex, nuanced story of long-term human movement and intermittent connection. It would place greater emphasis on the incredible maritime technologies of Polynesian, Asian, and American cultures, celebrating their engineering and navigational genius as central to human history, not as peripheral curiosities. Most importantly, it would validate and amplify indigenous perspectives and oral histories that have long spoken of ancient origins and distant connections. stories often dismissed as myth by Western academia. This integration of evidence is rarely swift. Look at the case of Polynesian contact with South America. For decades, the sweet potato was an inconvenient puzzle. Then came linguistic links, then chicken bones, and finally, the definitive genetic evidence of mixing around the year 1200. Each piece faced skepticism, but together they formed a picture so clear it could no longer be denied. The academic world is now slowly, carefully rewriting that particular chapter. Would accepting broader contact diminish the accomplishments of ancient American cultures? Quite the opposite, it would magnify them. To share an idea is not to lack it. If a culture adopts the pyramid form but infuses it with its own gods, its own astronomy, and its own societal purpose, that is an act of profound creative power. It shows discernment and adaptive genius. The true story becomes one of collective human ingenuity, a tapestry woven from threads contributed by diverse cultures across the globe. Our history would no longer be a series of isolated lights blinking on in the darkness, but a constellation where each culture shines brighter for its connection to the others. This is not a loss of unique glory, but a recognition of our shared, restless curiosity. The final, lingering question then becomes not who got where first, but what does it mean to discover something when someone else may have already known it for centuries? The answer may redefine discovery not as planting a flag, but as joining a conversation that began long before we ever set sail. Beneath the waves lies a hidden museum, its collection scattered across 95% of the ocean floor we have yet to see. This submerged realm is the next great frontier in our search, a place where the most direct evidence of ancient voyages may be perfectly preserved in cold, dark silence. The future of uncovering these connections depends less on shovels and more on sophisticated machines that can see through water and earth. It begins with marine archaeology's advanced toolkit. Autonomous underwater vehicles glide through the deep, mapping the seabed with side-scan sonar that creates detailed, photograph-like images of the bottom. To peer beneath the silt, researchers use sub-bottom profilers, sending acoustic pulses into the layers of sediment to reveal shapes buried for millennia, like the hull of a wooden ship or a cluster of ballast stones. These are not tools for finding treasure chests, but for finding context, the lost infrastructure of journeys. The potential sites are as vast as the ocean itself. Could a Phoenician trading vessel, blown off course, lie wrecked on a Caribbean reef? Might the remains of a Roman cargo ship, carrying amphorae never meant for American shores, rest in the mud of a Brazilian continental shelf? Even more likely are the submerged coastal settlements from the last ice age, the very launch points and receiving bays of the earliest coastal migrations along the Kelp highway. Finding a single such site with its tools, hearths, and perhaps even DNA could rewrite our understanding of human expansion and the durability of maritime cultures. Our view from above is becoming just as revolutionary. In the dense jungles of Central America, a technology called LiDAR is performing a kind of archaeological magic. Mounted on aircraft, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. These pulses penetrate the thickest canopy, measuring the time it takes for each photon to bounce back, building a breathtakingly precise three-dimensional map of the ground surface beneath. With the swipe of a digital brush, researchers can strip away the trees, revealing the ghostly footprints of entire civilizations. This is not theoretical. In Guatemala, LiDAR surveys of the Maya lowlands unveiled a sprawling network of raised highways connecting cities, vast areas of terraced farmland, and even defensive fortifications, showing a landscape far more populated and interconnected than anyone had guessed. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, LiDAR revealed a massive, low-density urban complex stretching far beyond the famous temple walls. Now, imagine applying this technology to the Amazon basin, the Congo, or the islands of the Pacific. What ancient roads linking now vanished ports might we find? Could we detect the subtle geometry of astronomical alignments or trade routes etched into landscapes we thought were wilderness? The view extends even further to orbit. Satellites equipped with synthetic aperture radar can see through cloud cover and dry surface sand, revealing subsurface features like ancient riverbeds or buried walls. Multispectral imaging detects minute differences in plant health, a clue that can signal something lies beneath. Stone foundations stunt root growth, while buried organic material like old post holes can fertilize the plants above, creating spectral signatures of long-vanished structures. These tools allow us to conduct surveys of entire regions, asking broad, new questions. Where should we look? What patterns of settlement, now invisible from the ground, tell a story of connection rather than isolation? The next decade promises a flood of new data, a cascade of digital discoveries that will provide context for the scattered artifacts and puzzling parallels we have long debated. The greatest evidence for a connected ancient world may not be a single shipwreck or inscription, but a map, a global pattern of pathways and sites revealed from space and sea, showing us that the threads between continents were not mere accidents, but part of a vast, intricate, and previously invisible tapestry. The jury is now in session. After hearing from witnesses of stone, seed, and bone, we must weigh the testimony. This is not about proving a single, dramatic verdict, but about assessing the texture of the entire tapestry. Some threads are strong, vibrant, and undeniable. Others are frayed, faded, or of questionable origin. To find a pattern, we must sort them by their strength. At the top of this gradient lies evidence that has moved from speculation to near certainty. The genetic link between Polynesian and South American peoples, dated to around the year 1200, is a profound data point. It is not an artifact that can be forged or a myth that can be misinterpreted. It is a biological record of a meeting, a family story written in the cells of living descendants. This is supported powerfully by the sweet potato, a living witness whose journey is confirmed by both its DNA and the linguistic trail of its name. Together, they form a cornerstone of proven contact across the world's widest ocean. Another strong thread is the coastal migration model, the Kelp Highway. While it speaks to an earlier epoch, it establishes a crucial precedent that our ancestors were capable mariners who moved along rich shorelines for millennia. It provides the technological and ecological context that makes later, longer voyages seem not like miracles, but like extensions of an ancient skill set. These are the sturdy warp threads of our tapestry. Then we have the weft, the crosswise threads that add color and complexity but are harder to tension. These are the artifacts: the Bat Creek stone, the Fuente Magna bowl, the Olmec heads. Each is fascinating, each is problematic. Their stories are compelling, but their provenance is often unclear, their interpretation hotly contested. They exist in a liminal space between evidence and enigma. They cannot be dismissed out of hand, for to do so is to ignore genuine puzzles, but they cannot bear the full weight of the argument on their own. They require corroboration that, so far, remains elusive. Standing opposite this is the powerful case for independent invention. It is an elegant and respectful narrative. It argues that the pyramid, the symbol, the discovery of plant medicines are not copies but parallel masterpieces. Given similar human minds facing similar challenges with similar materials, is it any wonder similar solutions emerged? This view celebrates the isolated flowering of genius and is backed by the consistent absence of certain evidence, like old-world genetic markers in pre-Columbian America, or conclusive foreign artifacts in clear archaeological layers. It asks a vital question: if contact was significant, where is the overwhelming proof? This brings us to the old adage, does absence of evidence equal evidence of absence? In a court, a lack of fingerprints does not prove someone was never in the room. It just means we have not found them. the drowned coastlines of the last ice age remind us that the most likely stages for early exploration are now under 100 feet of water. The silence in the record may be a geological fact, not a historical one. So what is the most plausible picture that emerges from this synthesis? It is likely not one of sustained colonization or frequent, scheduled trade routes. That would have left a much clearer signature. The most coherent model is one of sporadic, accidental, and culturally limited contact. A Polynesian voyaging canoe pushed off course, making landfall on the coast of South America. A reed boat from the Andes caught in a current, drifting to an island in the Pacific. These are not planned missions of exchange, but chance meetings that, when they occurred, could have led to profound one-time transfers. A gift of sweet potato vines, a shared story under the stars, a child who carried two worlds in their blood. This model honors both sides of our nature. It acknowledges the breathtaking capacity for cultures to invent their own worlds in glorious isolation, to solve the puzzles of the universe from scratch. But it also leaves room for the restless, curious, daring side of the human spirit, the side that looks at a horizon and wonders, and sometimes, against all odds, finds an answer. The tapestry, then, is not a map of empires connected by lines, but a fabric woven with threads of brilliant, independent color, crossed here and there by a few faint, golden strands of connection, reminding us that even in our separateness, we were never truly alone. The map of our past is being redrawn, not by erasing what we know, but by adding countless new connections. Our journey across continents and millennia reveals a history far more dynamic and interconnected than the old stories of isolated genius ever allowed. We have stood before stone giants whose faces whisper of faraway lands, traced the journey of a humble root vegetable that defied an ocean, and marveled at pyramids that seemed to speak a silent, shared architectural language. We have listened to the echoes in ancient words and witnessed the quiet, undeniable truth written in the very genes of living people. Each piece, from the tantalizing artifact to the genetic whisper, is a thread in a larger tapestry. While definitive proof for every bold claim remains just beyond our grasp, the cumulative weight of these anomalies creates a compelling picture. It challenges the comforting simplicity of a world where great cultures bloomed in perfect, proud isolation. This exploration does something more important than rewriting textbooks. It reminds us that history is not a fossil, a fixed story sealed in stone. It is a living, breathing investigation. It is a conversation between the present and the past, fueled by an insatiable curiosity and empowered by technologies our ancestors could never have dreamed of. Whether we view these parallels as monuments to independent invention or as clues to a forgotten conversation, they celebrate the incredible ingenuity of the human spirit. They force us to see ancient peoples not as primitive or static, but as explorers, innovators, and daring thinkers. They looked at the same stars, wrestled with the same materials, and asked the same profound questions about their place in the cosmos. The writer Arthur C. Clarke once observed that the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. That is precisely what we have done together in this exploration. We have ventured past the established borders of history to ask what might have been possible. And in doing so, we have not diminished the achievements of any culture, but have illuminated the shared, restless spark that drives all of humanity forward. We encourage you to carry this curiosity with you, reflect on these mysteries, research further, and share your own thoughts and questions in the comments below. The conversation about our shared past is one we all can join. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the puzzles of history, please subscribe for more journeys that question the past to better understand the fascinating, interconnected world we live in today.